Vinayak Chatterjee with us this morning, Chairman at Feedback Infrastructure, to also take forward that discussion really on what we can expect from the budget and under the new government. Vinayak, good morning. Do you think that a lot will be done for infrastructure in the coming budget and a lot of focus will be on spends? Because, the last time we spoke, you had mentioned that there was enough room for completion of whatever was, what had already been decided on or contracts that had already been discussed. Going forward, what's the agenda looking like to you? How confident are you of that push?
Look, I think the push on public expenditure on infrastructure is going to carry on, because without that, you're not going to get the main ingredient to pump prime the economy and get growth and employment back. I mean, that's very clear. It is one of the largest engines that pump prime the economy. So public expenditure on infra will happen, but beyond that, I think I would carefully watch two moves which we think are likely to happen. One is that government may announce a very major asset monetization policy. There is significant interest among foreign institutional investors and the like for investing in India's operating brownfield assets as distinct from new projects. And I think that reservoir of investable surplus and interest needs to be tapped, and the government is cognizant of that. So that's point number one. Point number two, I think there is an increasing recognition that the government has to push the pedal on PPP once again, which it did not do particularly actively in its first term. So I am betting on the fact that there's going to be a revival of PPP. Mr. Gadkari already is speaking about far more emphasis on BOT, which he did not do in his last term, and other ministries are picking up the cue. In terms of emergent sectors, I would say roads and highways will continue its strong momentum. Railways will continue. Metros are a very large and emergent sector, but the sector to watch really is the water sector. I think this government's focus is very, very clear that water is the priority sector. From big projects like river linking and irrigation to the iconic and epochal promise in the budget and subsequently about Nal Se Jal, pipe water to 100% households by 2024, you're going to see a major revival in the water sector, and all firms connected with that sector, whether it makes pipes or valves or filters or pumps and similar equipment, are actually likely to see a great upsurge in investor interest, I suspect a year from now.
Tap into government resources, privatize them. That reservoir has been open for many years now. It's just that nobody has very smartly tapped into it. Time and again, various attempts have been made. But frankly, if I look at the entire disinvestment proceeds, they've only come via only come via smokes and mirrors, where HPCL has bought into ONGC or REC has bought into PFC, where one government hand has taken from, where the right hand has given it to a left hand or vice versa. So where is the need of the hour? The urgent priority should be privatize. But nothing really moves on, Vinayak. I mean, that's the unfortunate reality.
Look, I agree with you, but I think the discussion has to move from disinvestment, which is a capital market transaction, to actually sale or long-term concessions to get cash back from operating brownfield assets. That honestly has nothing to do with capital markets. And the ministry that has really shown the way is Ministry of Roads, where last year it embarked on a TOT program where it had a minimum price of 6,500 crores for TOT1 and garnered 9,500 crores from an overseas investor. It happened to be Macquarie. Now TOT3 is out. So it has actually shown the way where existing government assets can be monetized. So the important thing is for the powers that be to push this point to the other ministries, because under the slogan of maximum governance, minimum government, there is no reason whatsoever for the government to run power plants, bus terminals, roads, ports, airports. So we have a huge amount of liquidity available to be released from brownfield operating assets owned by both the central government and the state government. And I think that should be a conscious plank of fiscal policy.
There would be enough and more buyers for this, because with the exception of, let's say, a Canadian pension fund, GIC, Macquarie, like you mentioned, there have been no large big ticket commitments which have come. I mean, minus small commitment here or there. I mean, if a sector like roads, which has opened up, I was hoping to see not one, but nearly 2 or 3 dozen large investors who would have queued up to pick up some of those assets.
Well, they did actually. There were 4 bidders for TOT1 and all very credible international players. But when you say you have not seen it, I go back one step and say, where have the assets been put on sale? How will you see the interest if assets are not put up for monetization? When they have been, you have seen interest.
That's exactly what we've been debating about as well, because the government has been in power for the last 5 years. You talked about as to how water would be a focus. We've heard about the river linking, waterways, etc. from most ministers, and Nitin Gadkari especially has given a lot of focus on it. He's talked about it at various public platforms as well, but the needle hasn't really moved much when it comes to that. However, closer home, you've got the Mumbai Metro project, which again is the dream project, and that's kick-started. And, with all the traffic snarls in the city, it seems like, the work as well is very much on progress. Could metro construction and just linkages within cities as well be a focus of the government this time?
Well, so far as the BJP manifesto is concerned, it prioritizes metro in 50 towns and cities. Equally important is that last year the Urban Ministry passed a major policy decision cleared by the Cabinet, which mandates the setting up of UMTA, Unified Metropolitan Transport Authorities, on any new metro or related project that is proposed for central government partnership and funding. So I think this business of taking urban transport seriously and not allowing it to move ahead without creation of an unified metropolitan transport authority is very, very important, and I think it's very important for Mumbai. In the past, there have been some discussions that the entire suburban railway system of Mumbai should be taken out of the womb of the Indian Railways and islanded in a separate SPV and then mandated to be run under a unified metropolitan transport authority, so that all modes of urban transport are interlinked, not just in terms of last mile connectivity with each other, but also in terms of payment mechanisms. So these are steps that have to be taken.
I'm going to ask you a very, simple and perhaps a question which may have very important implications for a sector like infrastructure, because that is funding, that is dependent on liquidity and funding. Currently auto companies and consumer durable companies and even the HFC companies are facing a liquidity crunch. What will happen to the infra space, which is dependent on continuous flow of liquidity, when the liquidity is really tight?
This is a fundamental point, and many of us who are in the sector have now been arguing for almost 5 years that, considering the national agenda, considering the national priorities, considering the huge public policy impact of that on economy, employment, and raising the standards of utilities in India, the sector requires a DFI, a developmental financial institution. Commercial banks are not going to lend. NBFCs today are not in a position to. The old institutions that were created, whether it was IDFC or ILFS or IIFCL, which currently continues to exist, are not ready or up to the task. IIFCL, for example, is clearly positioned to expand its charter, increase its balance sheet size, and play the role of a DFI. But the government must unshackle IIFCL with strong doses of capital, mandate, management, purpose, objectives. Without a DFI, this sector is going to languish. And please remember that DFI is not a negative word. Large number of India's successful industrial houses and entrepreneurs across the 60s, 70s and 80s were created only because of the activist DFIs that existed, IDBI, ICICI, IFCI. The infrastructure sector requires a DFI. The sooner this is recognized in policy circles and implemented, your question will probably get a positive answer.
The current lay of the land, the liquidity crisis which currently is haunting car sales, FMCG sales, it is having impact on AC, fridge and TV. I wonder in this kind of a tight liquidity scenario, what will happen to infra funding? So we may talk about all grandstanding big projects, but they may just end up becoming paper tiger, because if you cut the flow of water, which is liquidity in this case, you cannot irrigate anything.
Good. You have mixed infrastructure with rural water supply, which is a valid point.
So where do you see things turning is my question. In this budget, whatever may be the outcome, if the basic cause is not addressed, then we should just not hope anything big. I mean, nothing like a V-shaped rally or nothing like a miracle will happen if the liquidity is not addressed.
Okay, so let me separate your point into two different buckets. There is bucket one, where there are a number of infrastructure companies that had kind of dallied with PPP and BOT programs, whose balance sheets are stressed, and some are NPAs and some are on the verge of NPAs and some are generally stressed. Those are the firms that have raised their debt to huge levels and have dallied with a lot of huge balance sheet investments in infra. Now there is a separate class of infra companies which are medium-sized, small to medium, and largely family-owned, many of them listed, who have not dallied with large dollops of balance sheet investments in infra projects, but have remained fairly efficient EPC companies. Now, these companies, when they get valid contracts from statal entities, center, state or urban, believe me, do not have that great a problem of getting of working capital from banks against confirmed EPC orders. So your problem is not an all-encompassing problem. Your problem is actually in two buckets. So my hypothesis is, as more and more government projects of EPC type go to the second bucket of people who are eligible for bank credit based on the strength of their balance sheet, order books are riding an all-time high. Most of these firms, if you ask them, will tell you that their order book to turnover ratio is 3x. Their balance sheets are reasonably clean, and banks also wanting to do business are funding them. So I think the enormity of the problem gets watered down somewhat, does not get eliminated, when you see it across these two separate buckets.
All right, Vinayak, good to get your perspective there, and I'm sure we'll discuss this more with you as we count down to budget and, of course, post the big announcement. Thanks so much for joining.